Hello, my friend. The world of magic, filled with legends and ancient tales, is opening its gates once again. Tonight, in the Gryffindor dormitory by the crackling fireplace, I will share another story with my friends. Join us, for the magic is about to come alive.
The night London fell quiet was not a night of great import, or so it seemed. The rain came down softly, running along the slanted roofs of the Ministry of Magic like whispered secrets. Beneath the streets, where candlelight flickered in tall brass holders and the smell of parchment and ink hung thick in the air, a young witch sat alone at her desk. Her name was Evelyn Meadowcroft, and she was 23 years old. Her hair, a pale gold the color of sunlight on old pages, had escaped its tidy bun. Quills, half-drained ink bottles, and rolls of parchment were strewn about her table. The only sound was the steady scratching of her quill and the soft fluttering of wings from the enchanted message owls resting near the window. Evelyn worked in the Department of Magical Records, a division few ever visited unless they had to. It was her duty to trace wizarding lineages, confirm ancestry claims, and ensure the purity or legitimacy of bloodlines for legal matters. Most days were dull, filled with names, dates, and birth certificates enchanted not to fade. But tonight, something odd had caught her eye. The file was thin, too thin, in fact, for someone as talented and notable as Tom Marvolo Riddle. She had come across it by chance while sorting the post-HOGWARTS employment recommendations. His professors had praised him highly. Brilliant, ambitious, charismatic, they said. But when she cross-referenced his background, she found almost nothing. Born in a Muggle orphanage, it said. Father unknown. Mother Merope Gaunt, deceased. No living relatives listed. The bloodline, however, triggered a trace in the ancestral verification registry. A quiet chime that only went off when the system found connections to ancient wizarding houses, and this chime had rung thrice. That, Evelyn knew, was impossible. She pushed her chair back, frowning. 3 bloodline traces? How can that be? She murmured, running her wand over the record again. The page shimmered, revealing faint, half-erased runes, written in a language she didn't recognize. The runes pulsed for a moment, then vanished, leaving the parchment blank again. Something was wrong. Someone had tampered with the record. She glanced around. The other clerks had long gone home. The only movement came from the janitorial broom, floating lazily down the corridor. Evelyn bit her lip. She was not one to pry, but curiosity, once sparked, was not easily extinguished. She took a new parchment and began to write. Subject, Riddle, Tom Marvolo. Suspicious lineage anomaly detected. Recommend full ancestral audit. She sealed the report with her wax sigil, a small meadow flower pressed into gold, and tucked it into the internal review drawer. But as she slid the drawer closed, she heard something. A faint click. The drawer locked itself. Evelyn frowned. That's not supposed to happen. She tugged it again, but the handle stayed fixed. Then, from within the drawer, came a low whisper, "Tao." Not a sound exactly, but the ghost of one, like a memory of words spoken long ago. "Leave it." Her hand froze on the drawer. She stared at it, heart hammering. "Who's there?" she whispered. The whisper did not return. Only the faint echo of it lingered in her ears, like the hum of dark magic. That was enough to send her packing. She gathered her cloak, snuffed out the candles, and hurried up the corridor toward the lift. The enchanted memos fluttered by her head, rustling their wings like startled birds. When she reached the atrium, the great golden fountain gleamed in silence. Outside, the rain had stopped. The cobblestones glistened beneath the gas lamps. She pulled her cloak tight and started toward her small flat near Diagon Alley, trying to forget the whisper. But she couldn't. Even when she closed her eyes that night, she saw it, the parchment shimmering, the erased runes returning for an instant, spelling something she could not understand, and beneath them, a name that hadn't been there before. Not Riddle, not Gaunt, something older, something she had seen once, in the margins of a forbidden history text at Hogwarts. A name tied to dark legends, whispered only by the most daring students. When she awoke the next morning, she told herself it must have been a dream. Yet the wax sigil she had used for her report, the one she'd sealed the drawer with, was gone from her desk. Someone had opened that drawer after all. And somewhere, perhaps in an office high above hers, or in a place the ministry dared not name, a young man with dark eyes and a sharper smile was already aware that Evelyn Meadowcroft had asked a question no one was supposed to ask. He would make certain she never asked another. The next morning dawned gray and thin, with a faint mist curling over the cobbled lanes of Diagon Alley. Evelyn Meadowcroft hurried through the crowd, her cloak brushing past shop fronts, still shuttered from the night. Her mind, however, was not on the bustle around her. She could not stop thinking about the file, Tom Riddle's file, and the whisper that had come from the locked drawer. At first light, she'd gone back to the ministry, her nerves tight as harp strings. The Department of Magical Records was quiet as ever, and for a moment she thought she had dreamt the entire thing. Yet when she opened her desk, her sealed report was gone. The internal review drawer that had locked itself now stood slightly ajar, and inside, where her parchment had been, there was only a single black feather, glossy and cold to the touch. It wasn't from any bird she knew. It shimmered faintly when the light touched it, as though it belonged not to a living creature, but to a shadow itself. Evelyn's throat tightened. This was no prank. Someone had seen her report, removed it, and left a warning. Still, she refused to be frightened away. She'd always prided herself on her diligence, and this mystery, dangerous though it might be, called to something deep in her, a hunger for truth. So when her supervisor, the elderly and rather forgetful Mr. Burbage, wandered into the office, she greeted him as cheerfully as she could and asked to review old genealogical claims involving the Gaunt family. He blinked at her through thick lenses. "The Gaunts?" he mumbled. "Pure blood lot, nasty reputation. Their line's near extinct now, isn't it? Why the sudden interest?" "Just tying up some old files, sir," she said lightly. He shrugged, already distracted by the morning's coffee delivery. "All yours, Meadowcroft. Just don't go poking too deep. Some names are better left unspoken." She smiled politely, but inside, her curiosity blazed. Hours later, she descended into the lower archive, a cold, echoing chamber deep beneath the ministry, where the oldest magical records were kept. The air smelled of dust and age. Candles floated above long aisles of shelves, stacked high with ancient tomes, scrolls, and enchanted ledgers that murmured faintly to themselves. Evelyn carried her wand in one hand, whispering a soft lumos. The light gleamed off brass plaques marking each row. House of Black, Lestrange, Rosier, Gaunt. There it was, The gaunt section was smaller than most, and several of the ledgers bore burn marks, as though someone had tried to destroy them. Evelyn traced her fingers along the spines until she found one labeled Merope Gaunt, Issue and Descendants. The moment she touched it, the book shuddered. A voice, soft and rasping, filled the air. "Who seeks the blood of Gaunt?" Evelyn froze. Evelyn Meadowcroft, Ministry Clerk, Department of Magical Records, she said, forcing her voice steady. "I'm only reviewing ancestral data," the voice hissed, as if tasting her name. "Too late. The air walks again. The blood of Salazar flows once more." The book opened on its own, pages fluttering until it stopped at a single entry. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Below his name, faint golden ink formed runes that seemed to burn through the parchment. Evelyn leaned closer, heart pounding. The runes rearranged themselves, forming words she could read. Heir of the House of Gaunt, heir of Slytherin, bound to darkness by choice. Her breath caught. Heir of Slytherin. The ancient founder himself. She knew, as every witch and wizard did, of the legend, that only Slytherin's true heir could open the Chamber of Secrets. But that was a myth, a tale to frighten students, wasn't it? Evelyn's quill trembled in her hand as she copied the words. Yet before she could finish, a sudden chill swept through the chamber. The candles flickered blue. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the aisle, slow, deliberate, drawing closer. "Who's there?" she called. No answer, only the steady sound of steps. She drew her wand higher, light shaking. Between the shelves, a tall figure appeared. A man in dark robes, his face shadowed beneath the hood. He moved with an eerie calm, like someone perfectly certain of where she would be. "Miss Meadowcroft," said a voice smooth as silk. "Working late, are we?" The name struck her like a blow. No one but her superiors should know her by sight. The figure stepped closer, and the light revealed a young man, perhaps 20, with pale skin, dark eyes, and an elegant, handsome face. "Tom Riddle," she breathed. He smiled faintly, inclining his head. "At your service. I believe you've been looking into my file." Evelyn's mouth went dry. I handle many files as part of my work." "Indeed, but mine, I think, intrigued you more than most." His voice was soft, almost kind, but beneath it ran a current of command. "You found something unusual, something you weren't meant to see." She tried to step back, but her feet refused to move. It was as if the air itself had hardened around her. "You shouldn't be here," she said, though her voice trembled. "These archives are restricted." Riddle's eyes gleamed. "Rules are for those who lack power to break them." Her heart hammered. She forced her hand up, wand trembling. "Don't come closer." He tilted his head, almost amused, courageous, but misplaced. With a flick of his wrist, no wand, no word, her wand flew from her grip and clattered to the floor. Evelyn gasped. Wandless magic. She'd heard of it, but few living could perform it with such ease. Riddle stepped nearer until she could see her reflection in his dark eyes. "You opened the record of the Gaunts. You saw my name beside theirs. Tell me, do you understand what that means?" "I know enough," she whispered. "You're dangerous." He laughed softly. "You have no idea how dangerous." Evelyn took a shaky breath. "Why erase your past? Why hide who you are?" Riddle's expression darkened. "Because names have power, and mine," he leaned closer, voice low as a serpent's hiss, "will soon be the most feared in the world." Then just as suddenly, the lights flared bright. Riddle stepped back, his calm restored. "Forget what you saw, Miss Meadowcroft. Burn your notes. Tell no one." "I can't," she said. "The ministry deserves to know." His smile returned, cold and certain. "Then you've made your choice." A rush of magic burst through the air. The books on the shelves trembled. The light from her wand went out. Evelyn felt her knees buckle as darkness closed in, and the last thing she heard before everything faded was his whisper close to her ear, "I am no longer Tom Riddle." When she awoke, the chamber was empty. The ledger was gone. Her notes had turned to ash. Only the black feather remained, lying beside her hand, as if to mark the place where truth had been buried. She staggered to her feet, shaken but alive. Whatever he had done to her, he had not killed her. Not yet. But Evelyn Meadowcroft now carried knowledge that no one else in the ministry possessed, and Tom Riddle, the man who would soon call himself something else, had decided she would be the first to vanish for it. Evelyn did not return home that night. Her steps carried her through London's dim streets until dawn's pale mist curled through the air, but she could not bring herself to stop moving. She knew, deep within her bones, that Tom Riddle had not meant to let her live. Whatever force had stayed his hand, whim, arrogance, or something darker, it would not last long. When she finally reached her small flat above an apothecary, she locked the door with every charm she knew, then collapsed into a chair. Her hands shook so badly she could barely lift her wand. The image of his face haunted her, handsome, calm, and cold, as though humanity had already begun to fade from him. She tried to tell herself it was madness to think a single ministry clerk could stand against a wizard like him. Yet something deeper stirred within her, the same instinct that had driven her to uncover the truth in the first place. If she told no one, then Riddle would erase her as he had erased the records. But if she could find proof, undeniable, magical proof, perhaps the ministry would listen. Evelyn took a breath and reached for her satchel. From within, she drew out the one thing she had managed to keep from the archives before she fainted. A scrap of parchment torn from the gaunt ledger, burned around the edges. The runes were faint, yet still glimmered faintly gold. When she passed her wand over them, the ink flared to life again. Blood of Salazar, bound by oath, he who takes the name of serpent shall uncoil the doom of wizards. She didn't know what it meant, but it was enough. If she could trace these runes to their origin, perhaps she could discover where Riddle had learned of his bloodline and what he planned to do with it. There was one person who might help her, Professor Armeline Thorne, her former teacher at Hogwarts, a scholar of ancient runic magic, and once a friend of Albus Dumbledore himself. The professor had retired years ago to a quiet cottage in Somerset, but if anyone could interpret such symbols, it would be her. Evelyn packed what little she owned, her wand, parchment, and the feather that had appeared in her desk. It had no magical signature she could detect, yet it seemed to hum faintly whenever she touched it. She didn't dare throw it away. By midday, she had slipped through the Flu network, appearing in a swirl of green flames at a small country inn miles from the ministry's reach. The air smelled of wild thyme and rain-soaked earth. Somewhere far away, church bells tolled. She hired a carriage and made her way to the edge of the moors. Professor Thorne's cottage was just as she remembered. Ivy creeping up whitewashed walls, a garden overrun with herbs that glowed faintly under their own enchantments. Evelyn knocked, and after a pause, the door opened. Armeline Thorne stood in the doorway, her silver hair braided down her back. her eyes sharp despite her age. "Evelyn Meadowcroft," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "I never thought I'd see one of my students come running to my doorstep again. What brings you here?" Evelyn hesitated only a moment. "Danger, Professor, and a name. Tom Riddle." The professor's expression changed. She motioned Evelyn inside, bolting the door behind her. The air within the cottage smelled of spell components and wood smoke. "Tell me everything," she said. Evelyn did, the records, the erased lineage, the encounter in the archives. Thorne listened in silence, her lined face unreadable. When Evelyn finished, the old witch rose and paced to her shelves. "Riddle," she murmured. "Yes, I remember that boy. Dumbledore mentioned him once. Brilliant, charming, and far too curious about the dark arts. I warned Albus that some kinds of intelligence lead only one way." She took the parchment scrap from Evelyn's hand and examined it under candlelight. "These runes," she said, "are older than Hogwarts itself. They're written in the serpentine script of Salazar Slytherin's personal tongue, Parcel Runic, it was once called. Only those who speak to serpents could write it." Evelyn's heart sank. "Then he—" "Yes," said Thorne softly. "Your Mr. Riddle is not merely descended from Slytherin. He is his heir in truth, and if he knows it, he may already have begun to seek the artifacts tied to that bloodline, heirlooms imbued with the founder's essence." "Horcruxes?" Evelyn asked, the word trembling from her lips, though she barely knew its meaning. Thorne's eyes flicked toward her sharply. "Where did you hear that word?" I read it once in a restricted text at school. A fragment. It said they were objects of immortality." The professor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you know more than you should. If Riddle has turned his mind to such things, the world stands on the edge of darkness." Evelyn felt the chill return, the same cold she'd felt in the archives. "What can I do?" Thorne looked at her gravely. "You can hide. Burn that parchment. Forget the name Riddle and live quietly. If he learns you've gone to me, he will come." But Evelyn's fingers tightened around the table edge. "He already knows my name. If I run, he'll find me. If I do nothing, he wins." Thorne regarded her for a long time, then sighed. "Foolish bravery. You remind me of Albus." She fetched a small silver box from a shelf and opened it, revealing a shimmering blue powder. "Take this. It's a tracing dust. Old magic. Scatter it over any object linked to Riddle's bloodline, and it will reveal his movements. But beware, once it binds to him, he will feel it." Evelyn accepted the box with trembling hands. "Thank you, Professor." The old witch nodded. "Go before nightfall. I will send word to Dumbledore. Perhaps he can act before it's too late." But Evelyn never reached him. As she crossed the moor that evening, wind biting at her cloak, a sudden darkness fell. Unnatural, thick as ink, the lantern she carried sputtered and died. Somewhere behind her, footsteps echoed, soft, deliberate, like the ones she'd heard in the archives. She drew her wand, whispering Lumos. A thin circle of light appeared, and within it, black feathers drifted from the air. Then a voice, smooth and cold, broke the silence. "You really should have listened." Riddle stepped out of the darkness, his face calm, eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "You thought to flee to your old teacher. How very predictable." Evelyn backed away, heart racing. "How did you find me?" He smiled. "You carry the feather. It's mine, Miss Meadowcroft, bound by charm, to seek what I've touched. Every breath you took since that night led me here. Her wand hand shook. If you mean to kill me, then do it. But know this. Others will know what I found. He tilted his head, almost pitying. No, they won't. You've made a valiant effort, but your story ends here. Evelyn whispered the first spell that came to mind. Protego Maxima. And a shimmering shield flared to life between them. Riddle's eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat, she thought she might escape, but his reply was a whisper of death. A jet of green light tore through the night. Evelyn's world turned to silence. When the wind cleared, only her wand and the silver box remained in the grass. The tracing dust shimmered faintly, rising like mist into the sky. And somewhere far away, in a candlelit office at Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore paused, his quill freezing in midair as the air grew suddenly cold. A name whispered in the wind, though no one alive yet knew its meaning. Voldemort. The morning after Evelyn Meadowcroft's disappearance, the skies over Somerset broke with a storm that seemed born of fury. Thunder rolled over the moors, and wind bent the grasses flat to the earth. Professor Armeline Thorne stood at her window, the gray light glinting off her spectacles, her heart heavy with dread. She had known before the storm came that something terrible had happened. The silver tracing mirror on her mantelpiece shimmered faintly, a charm key to the dust she'd given Evelyn, but now its light was dying. The connection had been severed. Thorne closed her eyes. Gone, she whispered. Poor, brave child. She turned toward her writing desk and drew out a fresh sheet of parchment. Her quill moved swiftly as she penned a message. To Albus Dumbledore, urgent. A former student of mine, Evelyn Meadowcroft, has been killed, I fear by the one you once called Tom Riddle. He has uncovered the secrets of the Gaunt Line. His power grows, Albus. You must act. The parchment folded itself, sealed by a charm of blue wax, and transformed into a silver-winged raven that soared out into the storm. Thorne watched it vanish through the rain, then sat heavily in her chair. She was an old witch now, too frail to chase monsters, but she knew Dumbledore would not ignore her warning. Far away, in the castle high above the Scottish Highlands, the silver raven glided through an open window and landed upon the headmaster's desk. Albus Dumbledore lifted his gaze from a pile of student essays and unsealed the missive with careful hands. As his eyes passed over the words, his face darkened. Tom, he murmured, more to himself than to the room. What have you done now? The fire beside him flared a shade of deep, unnatural green. A whisper of magic carried upon it. The flames flickered into shape, forming the faint image of a woman's face. Albus? Came Minerva McGonagall's voice from her quarters. Is something amiss? Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. I believe we've lost someone who sought the truth. Do you mean... He nodded once. I feared he would kill again, but I had hoped. Not yet. Minerva's image flickered with grief. I remember her. Meadowcroft. She was one of yours, wasn't she? Charms and history of magic, top of her year? Yes, Dumbledore said, and now she is gone, another ghost in Tom's shadow. He rose from his chair, pulling his cloak about him. I must find what remains of her work. If she uncovered something in those records, it may be vital. He paused, looking toward the window. Rain streaked down the glass, and beyond it, the forbidden forest stirred with restless movement. I once thought, he said softly, that I might save him, but Tom Riddle has made his choice. The Ministry of Magic did not speak Evelyn Meadowcroft's name again. Within a week, her desk in the Department of Magical Records was cleared, her files redistributed. The official record said she had resigned to take extended leave abroad. Those who knew her better, a few friends from the clerk's wing, a kindly janitor, whispered otherwise. They said she had vanished after uncovering something she shouldn't have. And late at night, the filing drawers still whispered when the candles burned low. But one record remained unaltered. Deep in the archives, among the ledgers of the gaunt line, a faint golden rune still glowed upon the parchment she had touched, a mark even Riddle's magic could not erase. That mark would one day be found again years later, when the Dark Lord's name was spoken in fear across the wizarding world. Meanwhile, Riddle had not yet vanished entirely into legend. He still worked quietly, building his power beneath the Ministry's very nose. After Evelyn's death, he returned to London, his expression unreadable as he walked through the rain-soaked streets. He had been careful. No trace, no witnesses, yet a part of him lingered on the encounter. She'd been brave, that clerk. Foolish, yes, but brave. He found himself almost admiring her resolve before discarding the thought. Admiration was a weakness. He entered a narrow alley off Nocturne, the air heavy with the stench of potion fumes and damp stone. At its end stood a crooked shop with blackened windows, Borgin and Burke's. Inside, the proprietor, Mr. Borgin, looked up from polishing a silver dagger and paled at the sight of him. "Mr. Riddle," he said quickly, "a pleasure as always. Have you brought—" "Not today," Riddle said. "I've come for information." Borgin inclined his head. "Of course, sir. Anything you require." Riddle's gaze fell upon a glass case filled with ancient rings. One of them, Blackstone, set upon cracked gold, caught his attention. "That one," he said. "Where did you acquire it?" Borgin hesitated. "Old piece. Came through a collector in Little Hangleton, I believe. Belonged to a family called Gaunt," Riddle finished, his voice soft. He reached into his cloak and drew out a small leather pouch, spilling a handful of galleons onto the counter. "It's mine now." Borgin bowed low. "As you wish, sir." Riddle took the ring in his hand, feeling its cold weight. The faintest shimmer of runes ran along its edge. Runes not unlike those Evelyn had traced. He slipped it onto his finger and smiled. The air around him seemed to bend, whispering secrets no one else could hear. For a moment, a shadow stirred behind him, the faint outline of a serpent coiling through the air. He closed his eyes, letting the darkness sink into his veins. "Immortality," the shadow whispered. "Power eternal." When he opened his eyes again, the human warmth was gone. Only purpose remained. He turned to leave, his cloak sweeping the floor. "Should anyone come asking about a woman named Meadowcroft?" he said, not looking back. "You never heard of her?" "Yes, sir," Borgin said, trembling. "Of course, sir." Outside, the rain had stopped. Riddle walked into the night, his silhouette cutting through the fog like a blade. Somewhere behind him, lightning split the sky, and far to the north, Albus Dumbledore stood at the edge of the astronomy tower, gazing into the same storm, wondering if he was already too late. He did not yet know that Evelyn's feather, that strange black token of warning, had survived. It lay hidden in the folds of her cloak, caught on a thorn bush in the moors. Rain washed over it, and faint light pulsed within its veins, like a heartbeat refusing to fade. In time, someone else would find it. But for now, the world turned quietly toward its next shadow, unaware that a name had already been born in secret. a name that would soon make the bravest of hearts tremble. Voldemort. The storm had passed, leaving the moors washed clean beneath a silver dawn. Mist clung to the grass like breath, and the air smelled of rain and earth. On the lonely slope where Evelyn Meadowcroft had fallen, the world was quiet once more, yet all was not as still as it seemed. A cloaked figure moved among the reeds, a tall man with auburn hair streaked with gray and sharp blue eyes that caught the morning light. He was Albus Dumbledore, though few beyond Hogwarts yet understood the depths of his wisdom or the weight he carried. His wand glowed faintly as he knelt, brushing aside the damp grass. There, half buried in the mud, lay Evelyn's wand, snapped cleanly in two. Beside it, the small silver box she had carried shimmered faintly, its clasp still closed. Dumbledore lifted it with care, murmuring a preservation charm. "She came to find the truth," he said softly, "and she found death instead." From his cloak he drew Professor Thorne's letter once more. The ink had smudged from the rain, but the words remained legible. "Heir of Slytherin has uncovered the gaunt line. His power grows." He sighed. "So it begins." A soft crack of apparition echoed across the hill. Turning, Dumbledore saw Armeline Thorne appear behind him, her cloak whipping in the wind. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with grief. "You found her?" she said quietly. "What's left of her?" Dumbledore replied. He extended the silver box. "Is this what you gave her?" Thorne nodded, voice trembling. "Tracing dust, old as Merlin's own craft. If it's still intact, it may yet reveal where he went after he killed her." Dumbledore hesitated, then opened the box. The powder inside shimmered like the remnants of a dream. With a wave of his wand, he whispered an incantation, and the dust rose into the air, forming a thin trail of blue light. It drifted eastward toward London. "Knockturn Alley?" Dumbledore murmured. "Of course." Thorne's gaze followed the light until it faded. "Albus," she said softly, "you cannot face him alone." He smiled faintly. "No, but I can follow his path. And if I am right, there will come a day when he must face what he has become." He looked down once more at Evelyn's wand, then raised it gently, mending the broken halves with a wordless spell. "She was brave," he said. "Bravery deserves remembrance." Thorne closed her eyes. "Then remember her well, for the world will not. The Ministry will erase this, as it always does." Dumbledore's expression hardened. "Perhaps, but memory is a stubborn thing, Armeline. It finds ways to survive." He slipped the wand into his cloak and turned toward the horizon. The clouds were breaking now, shafts of sunlight spilling through, as if the world itself refused to mourn too long. Yet beneath that light something dark stirred, a sense of gathering purpose, unseen but relentless. Far below, in the twisting alleys of Knockturn, Tom Riddle stood before a mirror that was not a mirror. It was a sheet of polished obsidian framed in silver serpents, their jeweled eyes glinting faintly. Within its depths, faint images shimmered. A dark forest, a crumbling manor, a grave half swallowed by weeds. "Show me," he whispered. The mirror obeyed. The image deepened, revealing a decayed house on a hill, the gaunt shack where his mother had died. He could almost smell the dust, the despair clinging to its rotted beams. The serpent carvings at the frame's edge hissed softly, their voices weaving together like silk. "Return, heir of our master. Claim what is yours." Riddle's reflection smiled back at him, and though it bore his face, it was no longer quite human. His eyes flashed red for a heartbeat. gone so quickly that even he might have doubted it. He drew the ring from his hand and held it before the mirror. The gold was cracked, the black stone glinting faintly. Within it pulsed a magic older than time, whispering promises of dominion. Riddle's voice was low and measured. Salazar Slytherin built his legacy in secret. He left behind more than blood. He left power. I will finish what he began. The serpents coiled tighter, hissing approval. But as he slid the ring back onto his finger, he felt a flicker, faint but distinct, of resistance. It was not his own magic, but another's. Somewhere someone had traced him. His smile vanished. "Fools," he muttered. "Do they think they can follow me?" He turned from the mirror and strode into the shadows. A single word escaped his lips. A curse, ancient and cruel. The air rippled, and miles away the trail of blue light Dumbledore had conjured shuddered once and died. By nightfall, Dumbledore stood in the corridor outside the office of the Minister for Magic. The torches burned low, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Inside, voices murmured, clipped, impatient, full of self-importance. Cornelius Fudge was not yet minister. The office still belonged to Hector Blishwick, a man more concerned with trade policies than dark magic. When Dumbledore entered, Blishwick glanced up from his papers. "Dumbledore," he said wearily, "I trust this is important." "It is about a murder," Dumbledore replied. "One the Ministry will soon pretend did not happen." Blishwick frowned. "You speak of that girl? Meadowcroft? I've heard the rumors, but we found nothing."
"No body. Because the one who killed her is cleverer than any Auror under your command," Dumbledore said. His tone was calm, but the room seemed to grow colder. "Tom Riddle. He was a student of mine once, and now he has begun his ascent." Blishwick's quill froze mid-scratch. "You have proof of this?" Dumbledore placed the silver box upon the desk. "Proof enough? And if you do nothing, you will soon have more deaths to investigate than you can count." The minister sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Albus, you've always had a flair for dramatics. Riddle's a fine young man, from what I've heard. Works in our own Department of Mysteries, doesn't he?" Dumbledore's eyes flicked sharply toward him. "Yes," he said softly, "he does. That should worry you more than it reassures." But Blishwick only shook his head. "The Ministry cannot chase shadows. Leave it, Dumbledore. If there is danger, we'll act. For now, we must have evidence." Dumbledore inclined his head, though his eyes burned with quiet disappointment. "You will have it? I only hope, when the time comes, you still have the courage to face what that evidence will reveal." He left without another word. Behind him, the minister looked at the silver box still sitting on his desk, and after a moment locked it in a drawer. He would forget it within a week. But Albus Dumbledore did not forget. As he walked through the ministry's grand hall, past the fountain of golden wizards and mermaids, he thought of Evelyn Meadowcroft and her lonely courage. He thought of Tom Riddle and the darkness now rising in his wake, and he thought too of the prophecy yet unspoken, a whisper of balance that he could almost sense forming in the world, though its words had not yet been written. Somewhere, beyond the veil of time, a child would be born to meet that darkness. But that day was far off. For now, Dumbledore could only watch as the shadow took its first true shape, a name gathering strength, a legend beginning to breathe. The first victim was gone. The war had yet to begin.
and in the silence of his empty office, Tom Riddle's laughter echoed, soft, distant, and certain of victory. The night deepened over London, thick with fog and the faint hiss of gas lamps. In a quiet corner of Diagon Alley, hidden behind a charm of misdirection, Tom Riddle sat alone in a narrow room above Borgin and Burke's. The window was cracked open, letting in a draft that stirred the papers on his desk. Before him, candlelight gleamed against the surface of a heavy tome, bound in serpent skin. He had written her name across the first page, Evelyn Meadowcroft. Beneath it he had drawn a single line, then, with deliberate care, another name, Tom Marvolo Riddle. With the tip of his wand, he slashed through both names at once. The ink flared crimson and vanished, leaving only the faint shimmer of new words burning faintly in the air. Lord Voldemort. He said it aloud, slowly testing its weight. The sound filled the room, rolling like thunder within him. Riddle's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. Yes, he whispered, at last. He rose, pacing before the window. The streets below were empty, save for a stray cat slipping between shadows. The world, he thought, was so easily fooled. Wizards and witches clung to their illusions of safety, their ministry, their school, their precious laws, while power waited, unseen, ready for the taking. It was not Evelyn Meadowcroft's death that haunted him. It was her defiance. She had seen the truth, his lineage, his destiny, and refused to submit. It was almost poetic that she had been the first, but she would not be the last. Behind him the serpent mirror stirred. The carved snakes upon its frame whispered in a language few living souls could understand. Master, they hissed, you are reborn. Voldemort turned toward it. His eyes gleamed in the dim light, already touched with that unnatural scarlet hue that would one day mark his inhuman form. Reborn, he said softly. Not yet, but soon. He reached for the gaunt ring upon his finger. The stone pulsed faintly, a heartbeat of dark power. Within it lay the promise of eternity, though he did not yet know how to claim it fully. That secret, the secret of true immortality, remained locked within the ancient tomes of forbidden lore. He would find it. He would find them all. He seated himself once more, quill in hand, and began to write. Not words of confession or guilt, but the foundations of an empire. To create a world purged of weakness, a new order must rise. The pure shall lead, the unworthy shall fall, and magic shall reign unbound. He paused, listening to the whisper of his own voice as though the parchment itself drank his resolve. Then he drew a symbol in the margin, a circle enclosing a triangle and line, the Deathly Hallows, though he did not yet know their name. It was an ancient mark he had found carved upon the wall of the gaunt shack, glowing faintly when touched by moonlight. Something within it called to him, as if destiny itself had shaped it for his hand. 3 relics, he murmured. Power over death, power over life, and power over the unseen. If they exist, they will be mine. The mirror hissed again. One already whispers your name, Master. He turned sharply. What do you mean? The serpents twisted upon the frame. The wand, the Elder's wand, it stirs in its sleep. Voldemort's brow furrowed. He had heard the tale. An old children's story told in the tales of Beetle the Bard. But what if it was no myth? Magic is ancient, as the founders could not simply vanish. It had to reside somewhere, waiting for the will strong enough to claim it. He pressed his palm to the mirror's cold surface. Then let it sleep, he said, until I am ready to wake it.
While Voldemort plotted in shadows, Dumbledore moved through the Ministry's archives by wand light. The clerks had long gone home. Only the hum of the great magical wards filled the air. He paused before a filing cabinet marked M. Missing personnel, his face grave. Evelyn's name was not there. As Thorn had warned, she had already been erased. He whispered a charm, and the drawers glowed faintly blue. One, near the bottom, shimmered as though resisting his spell. Dumbledore knelt and opened it. Inside lay a single parchment, blank except for a faint watermark of a meadow flower, Evelyn's sigil. He touched it gently, and her voice, soft and distant, filled the air. If you find this, he knows who he is now. He calls himself by another name. Tell Professor Thorn I was right. He's not just a man. He's becoming something else. The message ended with a whisper of wind. Dumbledore stared down at the parchment, sorrow tightening his chest. He folded it carefully, slipping it into his robes. She gave her life to warn us, he murmured. And still, the Ministry will close its eyes. The wards trembled suddenly, a ripple of dark magic running through the air. Dumbledore rose swiftly, wand ready. From the far end of the corridor, the torches flickered green for a moment, the faint echo of a curse. Already here, he said quietly. He left the archives at once. When he reached the street above, the night air was cold, carrying the scent of rain and stone. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure watching from across the street, tall, cloaked, the faint gleam of a ring upon his hand. But when he blinked, it was gone. Dumbledore turned his gaze upward to the stars half hidden by the London mist. So it begins, he whispered again. The first shadow cast. He could not yet see the full shape of the darkness, but he felt it, growing, stretching, gathering strength in the cracks of the world. A storm not of weather but of will, forming around a single soul who believed himself beyond death. Deep beneath Nocturne Alley, in a chamber hidden even from Borgin, Voldemort descended a spiral stair lit by green fire. The walls were lined with bones, their surfaces etched with runes that pulsed faintly as he passed. At the center stood a stone basin filled with swirling, silvery light. A pensive, though ancient and unlike any known to modern wizards, he leaned over it, letting the mist curl around his fingers. Images shimmered within, his mother, pale and desperate, his father, cold and unfeeling, the gaunt house crumbling into ruin. He smiled faintly. They tried to chain me to their failures, he said, but I will be their retribution. He drew the tip of his wand across his palm. A drop of blood fell into the basin, and the light flared. The images twisted, now showing Evelyn's face, her eyes wide in fear and defiance. Voldemort watched her image dissolve, then vanish completely. No trace left, he murmured. No witnesses, no past. But even as he spoke, a faint shimmer appeared on the surface of the pensive, the outline of a meadow flower. It glowed once, then faded. He frowned. Somewhere a fragment of her magic remained, a seed she had sown before her death. He turned from the basin, cloak swirling. Let her ghost linger if it dares, he said coldly. It will not save them. Above him thunder rumbled once more over London, and so it was that Evelyn Meadowcroft, the clerk no one remembered, became the first shadow in a war not yet begun, the first soul to fall to the man who would become Lord Voldemort. But in the quiet heart of her lost wand, hidden in Dumbledore's cloak, a trace of her courage still burned, small, stubborn, unyielding, and someday
That same flame would light another wand, held by another who refused to bow. Winter settled upon England with a slow, relentless hand. Snow fell upon the wizarding world like white ash, softening the outlines of Diagon Alley, cloaking the rooftops of Hogsmeade, and stilling the restless waters of the Black Lake at Hogwarts. But beneath the calm, darker movements stirred. A wind was rising, one that carried whispers of fear and of a name not yet spoken aloud. At the heart of the storm stood Tom Riddle, though he had long ceased to think of himself by that name. In the hidden chamber beneath Borgin and Burke's, he was perfecting something no wizard before him had dared complete. Books lay open around him, their pages filled with forbidden runes. A heavy scent of smoke and iron filled the air. Upon the table before him rested the gaunt ring, glowing faintly with power. He turned it slowly between his fingers, the gem catching the candlelight. "It begins," he murmured. "At last I have what even the founders could not grasp." From the shadows, a figure stirred, thin, nervous, his face pale as milk. It was Mr. Burke, the shopkeeper himself, summoned by Riddle's command. He bowed low, his voice trembling. "You sent for me, sir?" "Yes," Riddle said softly, not looking up. "You have served me faithfully these past years. You have brought me relics of great worth, artifacts of the old bloodlines. Tell me, Burke, do you know why I seek them?" Burke hesitated. "Power, sir?" Riddle smiled faintly. "Power is only the surface. What I seek is freedom, true freedom, the kind that no wand, no spell, no curse can destroy." He rose, his dark cloak whispering against the stone. "Tell me, Burke, what do you know of death?" Burke blinked. "Death, sir? Only that no magic can—" "No magic, you know," Riddle interrupted. His voice was calm, but the air itself seemed to tighten. "But there are ways, ancient ways, rituals that divide the soul itself." Burke's face went white. "Sir, you speak of legends, of abominations." "Do you fear the word abomination?" Riddle asked. "Perhaps you should, for tonight. You will witness one." He lifted his wand, and the gaunt ring rose from the table, suspended in midair. A thin thread of crimson light ran from it to a small silver goblet, the Hufflepuff cup, stolen from an old witch who had once prided herself on its innocence. Riddle's voice deepened, a chant of harsh syllables that burned the air. Shadows writhed along the walls. The flame in the candles turned black. Burke fell to his knees, clutching his head as the temperature plummeted. When the chant ceased, the room was silent. The ring now pulsed with a dark, living light, and the cup shimmered with the echo of the same spell. Riddle lowered his wand, breathing deeply, a faint smile upon his lips. "It is done," he whispered. "2 anchors for 1 soul." Burke stared at him, horror dawning in his eyes. You've split your soul?" Riddle turned, his expression serene. "Do you think I would entrust my life to chance? Mortality is for lesser beings." He extended his hand almost kindly. "You have served me well, Burke. I will ensure you are remembered." Burke managed only a small, broken sound before the green light filled the chamber. When the silence returned, only Riddle remained. He watched the smoke curl from the lifeless body at his feet, then turned back to the ring. The gem gleamed brighter, as if drinking in the last traces of life. And in that moment, something shifted in him. A stillness, a coldness that no warmth could ever reach again. He had crossed the threshold. He had made his first Horcrux. Far away in the high office of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore stood before the fire, his thoughts heavy. The flames burned blue and gold, casting strange patterns across the walls. He held a letter in his hand, its parchment worn by many readings. Evelyn Meadowcroft's words, her final warning, still echoed in his mind. He had spent months tracing Riddle's movements, but every lead vanished into smoke. Reports of strange disappearances, whispers of cursed objects, nothing that the ministry could prove, but enough to tell him the truth. "Tom," he said softly, as though the young man could still hear him, "how far will you go?" He turned toward the portraits that lined the office. The faces of past headmasters gazed down at him, solemn and watchful. One of them, Phineas Nigellus Black, smirked faintly. "You always did believe in that boy," Black drawled. "I told you from the start he was trouble. Clever, yes. Charming, perhaps, but you can't civilize a serpent, Dumbledore. Sooner or later, it bites." Dumbledore gave no reply. He knew the truth of it, but he also knew something the portraits did not. Tom Riddle was not yet beyond reach, not completely. He looked to his desk, where a stack of Hogwarts admission files lay, new students for the coming term, names, ages, bloodlines, each one, he thought, a spark of possibility. Perhaps among them was a child who would one day stand where he could not. He set Evelyn's letter beside them. "She saw what I could not," he murmured. "She gave her life for a warning. I must be worthy of it." A soft knock sounded at the door. "Enter," Dumbledore called. The door opened and a young witch stepped inside, a recent graduate fresh from training as an Auror. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, and her eyes gleamed with quiet determination. "Miss Bones," Dumbledore said with a faint smile, "you received my message." "Yes, Professor," she replied. "You said you had information about a missing ministry clerk." "I do," he said. "But what I truly have is a question. How far are you willing to go to uncover the truth when the ministry itself would rather look away?" She hesitated, only a heartbeat. "And as far as it takes?" "Good," Dumbledore said softly. "Then I will show you where the darkness began." He handed her Evelyn's wand, repaired, polished, and faintly humming with its owner's magic. This once belonged to a brave woman. Her name was Evelyn Meadowcroft. She was the first to face the wizard we will one day know as Voldemort. The young witch's breath caught. "Voldemort," she repeated. "That's a name not yet feared," Dumbledore finished. "But it will be. And when it is, I would have you remember hers." He turned to the window, watching the snow drift over the towers of the castle. "History forgets its first martyrs, Miss Bones. But magic remembers. It always remembers." As she left, Dumbledore looked once more toward the fire. In its depths, he thought he saw the faint shape of a meadow, golden, wind-swept, and peaceful. And for a moment, he could almost hear Evelyn's voice again. "He calls himself by another name now." Dumbledore's hand tightened on his wand. "Yes," he said quietly, "and one day, I will make him answer for it." Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant thunder. Somewhere in the dark, Lord Voldemort smiled, and the next chapter of his reign began to unfold. The year that followed Evelyn Meadowcroft's death was one of uneasy silence. The ministry did not speak her name. The Department of Magical Records erased her files, her wand registration, even the mention of her birth. It was as if she'd never existed. But silence in the wizarding world is rarely empty. In corners where wizards met to whisper, in pubs and dim corridors, there lingered a question, an unnamed fear that something unseen was growing in strength. Few understood what it meant, save one. Albus Dumbledore watched the change take root from his office, high above the castle. He saw it in the faces of his students. A flicker of restlessness, a hunger for power. He felt it in the magic itself, which hummed strangely in the air, heavier and colder than before. The shadow of Tom Riddle had not left Hogwarts. It had only gone to ground, waiting to rise. And rise it did, quietly, cunningly, like a serpent uncoiling in the dark. Riddle had vanished from London. For nearly a year, even Dumbledore could not trace him. But Tom Riddle did not vanish into obscurity. He was abroad, in Albania, in Greece, in the crumbling ruins of wizarding kingdoms long forgotten. Wherever he went, he sought relics, histories, and fragments of dark magic that most wizards would not even name. He traveled alone. He preferred it that way. Companionship was a weakness, and he had shed such things long ago. In a ruined fortress, on a mountain peak, he found a library buried in ice, shelves of books bound in dragon hide, sealed by spells that had outlived their casters. One of them opened to his touch, as if it had been waiting. Its pages whispered of ancient magics, of souls bound to earth by fragments of vessels made immortal. The language was old, the instructions incomplete, but the meaning was clear enough. It spoke of Horcruxes. He traced the word with his finger. "The secret of eternity," he murmured, "and the price is only what I no longer need." When he left the fortress, he carried a new purpose with him. He would not merely make one Horcrux, he would make many, enough that not even death could find all of him. It was that night, as he descended the mountain, that he first began to hear the voices. Not madness, no, he knew that much, but something older, deeper. The voices of the ancestors whose blood he carried, whispering from the dark recesses of time. Heir of Slytherin, heir of our vengeance. He smiled at the sound. For the first time, he did not feel alone. In London, Dumbledore pieced together what little evidence remained. A cursed cup, a vanished merchant, rumors of a ring bearing Slytherin's crest. Each thread led back to one name. He wrote letters to the ministry, to the Auror office, to the few colleagues he trusted. Each time he was met with silence or polite dismissal. Hector Blishwick had been replaced by another minister now, Wilbur Wagtail, a politician of smiles and empty words. "You worry too much, Dumbledore," Wagtail had said when they met. "Tom Riddle was an exceptional student, yes, but hardly the monster you fear." Dumbledore had only smiled thinly. So was Gellert Grindelwald once. That silenced the minister for a time. But the silence changed nothing. Dumbledore could not fight what the ministry would not see. So he waited, watched, gathered, and quietly he began to build his own network, a web of watchers, friends, and students who trusted him more than the government. He met them in secret places. A retired Auror named Doge, a young witch named McGonagall, and a few others who would one day become the first sparks of the Order of the Phoenix. It was in one such meeting that he first heard the name Voldemort. The leaky cauldron was nearly empty that night. Rain lashed the windows. Dumbledore sat in a shadowed corner, a hood drawn over his silver hair. Across from him a young wizard leaned forward, voice low and trembling. "They call him Lord Voldemort," the man whispered. "He's gathering followers, witches, wizards, even creatures from the forest. He promises them freedom, power, says the old bloodlines will rise again." "Voldemort," Dumbledore repeated quietly. The name had weight to it, cold and deliberate, a word born of vanity and fear, the very name he would choose. The man's hands shook. You know him, don't you? I taught him, Dumbledore said, and I failed him. He left the tavern without another word, the rain hissing around his boots. Meanwhile, in a forest not far from Little Hangleton, Voldemort stood before the ruin of his mother's home. The gaunt shack was a skeleton of his former self, the roof half collapsed, the door hanging open, frost creeping along the floor. Yet here he felt a strange kinship. This was where his bloodline had ended and his reign would begin. He moved through the house with slow steps, his wand glowing faintly. The walls whispered. The snake carvings above the hearth seemed to shift in the light, and there, beneath the floorboards, he found it, an old locket tarnished with age bearing the crest of Salazar Slytherin. He lifted it reverently. So, it comes to me at last. When he opened the locket, a hiss escaped it, faint but alive. The air filled with whispers, and the temperature dropped to frost. He smiled. Power answered him. He drew his wand and began the ritual, the same dark chant he'd spoken with the ring, but now refined, perfected. When the spell ended, the locket gleamed like a captured flame. He felt a hollowing within him, as though a door had opened where none should be. But he did not waver. Pain was a tool, death was a myth. He left the shack at dawn, the locket gleaming against his chest. Snow fell upon the valley, covering his tracks. Weeks later, in his office at Hogwarts, Dumbledore stared at a map of the British Isles. Tiny enchanted lights glowed upon it, points of magical disturbance, traces of curses too strong to be mere accidents. Each one, he suspected, marked a step in Riddle's path. He touched one of the lights, murmuring softly. "The Gaunt home," he said. "Again and again you return to it. Why?" The fire in his hearth flickered. For a moment he thought he saw a meadow reflected in the flames and the faint shimmer of golden hair. He closed his eyes. "I have not forgotten, Evelyn," he whispered. "Nor will I." As the night deepened, Dumbledore stood and turned toward the window. Snow fell softly upon the castle towers, and somewhere below, the students laughed, innocent of the gathering storm. He smiled faintly, though his heart was heavy. "Not yet, Tom," he said into the night. "Not yet. But the time will come when the world learns what you are." He extinguished the lights on the map one by one. Beyond the glass, the stars burned cold and clear. And far away, in the darkness of his hidden lair, Lord Voldemort smiled in his sleep, the dreams of eternity coiling around him like a serpent waiting to strike. The winter turned to spring, but there was no warmth in it. Across the wizarding world, a strange unease was spreading. Something unspoken that made even the most ordinary spell feel uncertain, the most cheerful fire burn cold. The Ministry called it superstition. Dumbledore knew better. He could feel it in the air, in the way the wards of Hogwarts whispered restlessly at night. A storm was gathering once more. Far beyond the castle, hidden deep within the moors, Lord Voldemort moved unseen. He no longer sought to hide his ambitions from himself. He had shed all doubt, all restraint. His name, once spoken in secret, now passed from one frightened mouth to another. In Nocturne Alley, they whispered it with awe. In Hogsmeade, they spoke it only in shadow. He who must not be named was a title yet to come. But already the world had begun to tremble in the shape of that fear. Voldemort's power grew not through open war, but through careful weaving. He gathered those who longed for power, for recognition, for vengeance against the world that had scorned them. pure-blood fanatics, ambitious ministry workers, and those whose hearts had already darkened with cruelty, all found themselves drawn to his voice. Among them was Abraxas Malfoy, proud and sharp-eyed, who saw in Voldemort the promise of order restored. There was Walden McNair, brutal and cunning, who served gladly so long as there was blood to spill. And there were others, nameless, masked, his followers, though he had not yet christened them with the title Death Eaters. They met in a manor outside Wiltshire, beneath a ceiling painted with serpents and stars. Voldemort stood at the head of the table, his wand casting a cold green light across their eager faces. "You have come seeking power," he said, his voice calm, measured, "and I will grant it. But not as fools understand power, not through office or title, through mastery of magic, of death, of yourselves." A murmur ran through the room. The very air seemed to thicken with his presence. "Wizard kind grows weak," Voldemort continued. "The Ministry fears its own shadow. Dumbledore coddles children while the Muggles multiply and spread like rot. But we," his eyes flashed crimson in the half-light, "we shall restore what was lost. The age of blood, the age of magic unbound." Abraxas rose. "And what of those who oppose you, my lord?" Voldemort smiled thinly. "They will learn that opposition to immortality is merely another form of suicide." Laughter rippled uneasily through the crowd. Some laughed out of devotion, others out of fear. Voldemort heard the difference. It pleased him. Fear was loyalty of the purest kind. That night, as his followers celebrated their new allegiance, Voldemort withdrew to the manor's cellar. It was quiet there, no sound save the drip of water from the stone ceiling. He drew from his cloak a small silver-bladed dagger and placed it beside a photograph. The picture was faded, charmed to move, though only one face turned within it. A woman, pale, hollow-eyed, clutching a newborn child. His mother. He looked upon her face with something that might once have been pity. "You were weak," he whispered. "You died when you might have lived, but your blood gave me strength. Through you, I ascend." He raised the dagger and pressed its edge to his palm. A single drop of blood fell upon the photograph and hissed into smoke. The ritual began. The basement trembled as Voldemort whispered in the ancient tongue of serpents. The air split with light, and the faint echo of a scream filled the chamber. Not his own, but something older, something torn from the veil between worlds. When the spell ended, Voldemort stood in silence. Upon the floor lay the photograph, untouched but changed. The woman's face no longer looked away. Her eyes were open, lifeless, as if staring through him. He smiled faintly and slipped it into his cloak. Another piece of him now belonged to the darkness. At Hogwarts, Dumbledore felt the shift. It was subtle, a gust of wind through the great hall candles, a flicker in the wards. He looked up from the high table, his gaze distant. "Something's happened," he murmured. Minerva McGonagall, seated beside him, followed his gaze. "Another disturbance?" "Yes," he said softly. "But this one is different. The magic tastes of permanence, as though the world has changed and does not yet know it." He rose, leaving his supper untouched, and walked from the hall. His steps carried him to the astronomy tower, where the stars burned bright against the blackness of the sky. He lifted his wand and drew a series of runes in the air, each glowing golden before fading. The lines connected, north, east, south, west, and then froze over with frost. A pattern formed, 7 points of light, 7 disturbances. He did not yet understand their meaning, but deep in his heart he felt the shape of it, the echo of something terrible and deliberate. A soul, he whispered, divided. And for the first time Dumbledore felt fear, not for the world, but for the boy he had once believed could be saved. Weeks later, in a desolate wood near the edge of Scotland, a traveler stumbled upon a ruin. He was a ministry cartographer, charting ancient magical sites, and he thought the stone tower before him nothing more than another forgotten keep. But when he entered, he found the walls pulsing faintly, alive with dark sigils that burned at his touch. At the tower's center lay a single black feather. He bent to pick it up, and the instant his fingers closed around it, visions filled his mind. A woman with golden hair, a young man with eyes like burning coal. A scream cut short. He dropped the feather and fled. The tower collapsed behind him, vanishing into smoke. When Dumbledore received the report days later, he said nothing. He knew what it meant. Evelyn Meadowcroft's trace, her last act of defiance, had stirred again, her magic crying out from the void as though to say, "I am not gone." He carried the feather to his office and placed it beside her wand. The two hummed faintly when brought together, the air shimmering with a soft, defiant light. "She still fights you, Tom," Dumbledore said, "even in death." The firelight flickered across his face, etching deep lines of sorrow there. "And perhaps," he added, more to himself than to the room, "it will be the forgotten ones who undo you." Outside, the storm clouds gathered once more over the castle. Thunder rolled across the highlands, and in the darkness beyond, where no stars shone, Lord Voldemort turned his eyes to the horizon, feeling a faint pulse of magic that was not his own. For the first time in years, he frowned. "Impossible," he whispered, yet the air itself seemed to whisper back, soft, unseen, like the rustle of a meadow in the wind. She remembers. The year was 1959, and the world beyond the walls of Hogwarts was changing. Even among Muggles, the sense of an age ending could be felt, though they could not name the reason. In the wizarding world, the reason had a name, one that, though not yet feared aloud, moved through dark alleys and candlelit rooms, like a curse, half-spoken. Voldemort. The name was a shadow that followed whispers, a serpent winding its way through the ministry's corridors and into the homes of those who thought themselves safe. Still, most dismissed him as rumor, a legend born of fear. Only a few believed that Tom Riddle, once a student of Hogwarts, now walked among them as something greater and infinitely darker than a man. Albus Dumbledore was one of them. He stood before the hearth in his office, its flames shifting from gold to blue. On his desk lay parchment after parchment of reports, disappearances, strange magical disturbances, thefts from old vaults. Each one carried the faint scent of a pattern. The Gaunts, the Hufflepuffs, the relics of the Founders. He turned to Fawkes, who perched nearby, feathers glinting like sunlight. "He's collecting them, old friend," Dumbledore said quietly. "One by one." The phoenix trilled softly, as though in mourning. Dumbledore sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "I thought I could reach him once. I thought he might still remember what it meant to be human." His gaze fell to the wand and black feather resting side by side on the desk. Evelyn believed that truth could defeat darkness. She was wrong. Truth only angers it. Outside, rain lashed against the window panes. The wind howled across the towers. Yet deep in the mountains of Albania, far from the civilized world, that same wind carried a different sound, hissing, rhythmic, alive. In the ruins of a monastery long forgotten by both wizard and muggle alike, Lord Voldemort knelt before a stone altar carved with serpents. Candles burned around him in a perfect circle, their green flames licking upward like tongues. He had come to this place seeking an artifact older than the school that had once denied him. It was said that one of Salazar Slytherin's earliest followers, a sorcerer who could command the dead, had hidden his wand here, crafted not from wood but from the bone of a basilisk and the heartstring of a sea serpent. And now, after years of searching, Voldemort had found it. The wand lay upon the altar, pale as ivory, gleaming faintly. He reached for it, his fingers brushing its cold surface, and at once visions flooded his mind. He saw dungeons flooded with serpents, the great founder himself speaking words that twisted through time. He saw his own reflection, no longer handsome but sharp, cruel, immortal. He gasped, feeling the magic surge through him. The wand accepted him. It belonged to him now as if it had always waited for his touch. Finally, he breathed, a wand worthy of me. The chamber trembled, dust falling from the vaulted ceiling. The runes upon the altar glowed blood red. Voldemort rose, raising the wand high, and the candlelight dimmed until only his face remained visible, a face already shifting, hardening, the features of a man vanishing beneath the promise of a legend. He left the monastery before dawn, his cloak sweeping the frozen earth. Behind him, the ruins collapsed in silence. In England, Dumbledore felt the shock of it. The wards around Hogwarts quivered as though struck by a great wave of magic. He turned sharply from the window, his wand drawn, every candle in his office guttering low. Another relic, he said softly. He's found another. He moved quickly, gathering his cloak and hat. Within minutes, he had descended the spiral staircase and strode through the great wooden doors into the rain. His path took him to the edges of Hogsmeade, where an old friend waited, a wiry wizard with a kind face and weary eyes. Elphias, Dumbledore greeted. Another disturbance? Doge asked grimly. Yes, I can feel it even here. He's reaching farther than ever before. The two walked together beneath the storm, their wands lighting the road ahead. Dumbledore spoke quietly, his voice heavy. I thought Evelyn's sacrifice would delay him, that her interference might at least buy us time, but he's moving faster than I feared. Doge frowned. You still think of her often? She was the first to die by his hand, Dumbledore said, but she will not be the last. Her death was a signal, a beginning. He kills to shape the world, not to rule it. That makes him far more dangerous. They stopped at a crossroads where three roads met. The signpost bore names worn nearly to nothing by the rain. Dumbledore looked up. Do you remember when we were students, Elphias? We thought the darkest thing in the world was failing an exam. Doge smiled faintly. A simpler time. Not simpler, Dumbledore corrected. Only blind. The rain thickened. Lightning flashed across the moors, illuminating the distance where the shadow of a serpent seemed to coil along the horizon. Far away in Wiltshire, Voldemort gathered his followers once again. The room was larger now, grand, filled with the scent of fire and incense. His new wand rested beside him, gleaming faintly on a black table. They knelt before him, Malfoy, Rosier, Mulciber, and a dozen others, their faces half hidden by masks. Voldemort stood, his voice carrying over them like a tide. Tonight you cease to be servants, he declared. You are disciples of a new order. together we will tear down the decaying world that denies us." He lifted his wand, and a spark of green fire erupted from its tip, swirling above their heads and shaping itself into a serpent in flight. "From this night forth you will bear my mark," he said, "a mark that binds, that commands, that reminds you of who you serve." He touched his wand to the air. A burning sigil formed, writhing like something alive, the skull, the serpent, the symbol that would one day be known as the Dark Mark. One by one he pressed the tip of his wand to their forearms, searing the image into their flesh. Each cried out, then bowed low. The mark glowed green before fading into their skin. When it was done, Voldemort surveyed them with satisfaction. "You are mine," he said, "and through me death itself shall kneel." They bowed again, and in the silence that followed, thunder broke over the manor like the voice of prophecy. In the north, Dumbledore watched the storm from the astronomy tower, feeling the distant tremor of magic ripple through the air. Fawkes stirred on his perch, feathers rustling in unease. "Yes," Dumbledore murmured. "I feel it too." He lifted Evelyn's wand from his desk, the black feather lying beside it. The two pulsed softly together, answering the dark call with their own faint light. "Not yet," Dumbledore whispered, "but the day will come when the world will need her courage again." He placed the wand upon the shelf and turned to the window, his eyes fixed on the lightning far beyond the mountains. "It has begun," he said, and miles away, Lord Voldemort smiled, unaware that the first light of resistance had already been kindled, small, fragile, but alive. The year crept forward into another uneasy summer, the sun shining upon a world that no longer felt bright. The wizarding world, though outwardly at peace, had begun to turn inward, whispering to itself in the corners of pubs and alleyways. The paper spoke only of small disappearances, of odd accidents, of things under investigation. But those who paid attention, those who remembered the name Tom Riddle, knew that something vast was rising beneath the surface. The shadows now had a master. Deep beneath Riddle Manor in Little Hangleton, Lord Voldemort had made his lair. The house above lay silent and empty, its windows boarded, its gardens dead. But below, the earth had been carved into chambers, smooth, circular halls, lined with stone serpents that seemed to breathe in the half-light. The air was cold and heavy with enchantments. There Voldemort stood before his followers. Their numbers had grown, more than 30 now, cloaked and masked. He walked slowly among them, his voice quiet, yet it carried through the chamber as if the walls themselves listened. "You have each proven your loyalty," he said. "You have carried my will into the world. The weak have fallen, the unworthy tremble. Yet still, there are those who believe the ministry can protect them." A hiss of contempt rippled through the gathering. "They will learn," Voldemort continued. "They will learn what fear truly means. Tonight we strike again. A message to the cowards who hide behind laws and peace." He turned, his new wand gleaming faintly in the torchlight. "The time for secrecy is ending. The world must see our mark." A murmur rose, eager, hungry. They were his now, bound by his magic, his will. Each bore the mark he had carved into their flesh, and when he called, they felt it burn like living fire. Voldemort smiled faintly. He had become more than a man to them. He had become an idea, and ideas could not die. When they had gone to carry out his orders, he remained in the chamber, alone. He walked to the great serpent carved along the far wall and pressed his hand to its open jaws, the stone slid aside with a soft hiss, revealing a smaller chamber beyond. Inside, lit by a single green flame, rested 3 objects, a ring, a locket, and a cup. Each gleamed faintly, alive with dark power. He studied them for a moment. 3, he said softly. 3 of 7. He knelt before them, his reflection fractured in their polished surfaces. I have conquered death thrice, and still I am not satisfied. The soul is vast. It can be divided further. He rose, drawing from his robes a small leather-bound book, once blank, now filled with his handwriting, his life's work. The cover bore his new name in silver ink, Lord Voldemort. This will be the next, he whispered, my memory, my mind, my true self. He placed the book upon the altar and raised his wand. The words he spoke were not meant for mortal tongues. The chamber trembled, the torches flared blue, and from the heart of the flame came a whispering chorus, ancient, terrible, approving. When it was done, the book glowed faintly. Voldemort closed it and smiled. His eyes burned red as embers. Soon, he said, there will be nothing left to destroy. At Hogwarts, Dumbledore sat alone in his study, the sound of summer rain filling the room. Before him, on the desk, lay a small collection of objects. A broken ring he had recovered from the ruins of the Gaunt house, the charred remains of a silver cup, and an old journal found in the wreckage of a wizarding home. Each pulsed faintly, radiating a darkness that even his magic could barely contain. He turned to the window. The grounds below shimmered with lightning. He has gone farther than even I feared, he murmured, fragments of a soul, scattered like ash upon the wind. Fawkes trilled softly beside him, a sad, haunting note. Dumbledore nodded. Yes, the price of immortality is the loss of self, but the danger lies not in his desire to live forever. It lies in his belief that he deserves to. He rose and paced slowly before the fire. His mind returned again to Evelyn Meadowcroft. It had been nearly a decade since her death. Yet still she haunted him. Her courage, her faith that truth would be enough. He wished she could have known how wrong she was, and how right. From the shelf behind his desk, he took her wand. The black feather still rested beside it. When he held them together, the faintest shimmer of light ran along the feather's edge. It pulsed once, then stilled. She would not want vengeance, Dumbledore said quietly. Only justice, and perhaps one day, redemption for him, or for the world he will wound. He replaced the wand and feather, his gaze hardening. But redemption must be earned. Across the sea, Voldemort's followers moved like smoke through the cities of Europe. They spread his name, whispered his promises, and carried his mark upon their skin. Some were driven by fear, some by greed, but all by the strange magnetic pull of his will. It was in Paris that they struck next, an attack so sudden that the Ministry could not conceal it. The headquarters of the French Department of Magical Law Enforcement was left in ruins, its walls scrawled with a mark no wizard had seen before. A skull, its mouth open, and from it a serpent winding into the air. The newspapers called it the symbol of the serpent. Dumbledore knew better. He knew it was the beginning of a war. He gathered those who would listen, trusted witches and wizards, young and old. Among them were McGonagall, Doge, a quiet man named Moody, and a gentle witch named Bones. They met in the room of requirement where no ear could listen. There is no law against him yet, Dumbledore said, his voice steady. No name for what he has done. But there will be. He is building something, an army, yes, but also a belief. He would have us live in fear. Let us show him that courage too, as followers. They looked to him in silence. Then one by one they nodded. Thus, without fanfare or prophecy, the first light of resistance was born, the faint spark that would one day be called the Order of the Phoenix. Far beneath Little Hangleton, Voldemort stood before his growing army. The chamber was alive with green fire. He looked upon his masked followers, hundreds now, and raised his wand high. "The world trembles before us," he said. "Soon, even death itself will bow." The crowd roared their approval. He lowered his wand and smiled. "But remember this, there was once a woman who thought to challenge me, a clerk, forgotten by all. Her name was Evelyn Meadowcroft." The name hung in the air, strange and foreign. None among them knew it, but Voldemort remembered. "She believed knowledge could stop me. She believed truth had power. And for her belief, she died." He paused, eyes gleaming. "Let that be the lesson. There is no truth but mine." The crowd shouted his name again and again, "Voldemort, Voldemort," until the sound filled the chamber like thunder. But far away, in the quiet heart of Hogwarts, a single black feather stirred in the dark, and though no one heard it, the air around it whispered softly, defiantly, "There is always another truth." The world darkened slowly, like a candle burning low. Years passed, and though no open war had yet begun, fear spread quietly through the wizarding world. It crept into hearts and homes, into the classrooms of Hogwarts, into the very language people used. Wizards began to speak in half-sentences, leaving names unspoken. Shopkeepers closed early. Travelers no longer lingered in the warmth of pubs. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. And at the heart of it all, the shadow deepened. Lord Voldemort had become a myth among the frightened and a god among the faithful. His followers, now countless and organized, moved like phantoms through cities and countryside alike. To some they were liberators, to others executioners. They had no single name, but among those who dared whisper, they were called the Death Eaters. Each bore upon their arm a brand that burned when their master summoned them. Each swore an oath to him that bound more tightly than any curse. But Voldemort no longer trusted even them. In the bowels of Riddle Manor, he had created a labyrinth of chambers, each filled with relics, protections, and secrets known only to him. He spent his nights among them, speaking to the Horcruxes he had made, his fragmented soul echoing faintly from object to object. He took comfort in their silent presence. They were proof of his triumph over mortality. Yet even he could feel the faint pull of something unfinished. There was one Horcrux yet to be forged, one final division that would secure him against any possible end. But for that, he required a murder unlike any other, not vengeance, not convenience, a death of meaning. And though he did not admit it, he knew exactly whose that would be. He saw her sometimes in his dreams. Evelyn Meadowcroft, the clerk he had killed so long ago. Her face rose from shadow, her voice calm and accusing. "You thought yourself immortal," she would whisper, "but you left something behind." Voldemort would wake then, his body rigid, his breath quick. The image would fade, but the unease would remain. It was as if her memory had clung to the magic of his first killing curse. He began to search for its source. Night after night he combed through records, archives, even the hidden vaults of the Ministry, disguised, unseen. He found no mention of her. It should have reassured him. It did not. for magic has its own kind of memory, and hers refused to die. He began to feel it in his wand, the faintest hum, almost like resistance. When he cast spells of death, the magic flowed differently now, heavier, slower, as though the world itself hesitated to obey him. In fury, he struck down one of his own followers, a nameless wizard who had failed to kneel quickly enough. The killing curse flared green, but its echo twisted in the air like smoke refusing to fade. The scent of grass and wildflowers lingered in the room long after the man's body was gone. A meadow. Voldemort stood alone in the silence, breathing hard. A trick, he told himself, a memory, nothing more. But the whisper in his dreams said otherwise. At Hogwarts, Dumbledore could feel the same tremor, an invisible tension humming through the very wards of the castle. He stood by his window gazing over the lake, his thoughts far away. The first attacks upon Muggles had already begun. Families burned in their homes, towns vanished overnight, their ruins wiped clean by the Ministry's obliviators. It was a quiet war, fought in shadow, but Dumbledore knew how such wars ended. He'd seen it before, in another century with another man. He sat at his desk and unfurled a map. Red ink marked points of violence across the country. The pattern was clear now. Voldemort's forces moved in spirals, circling inward, closing upon something at the map's center. London, the Ministry itself. Soon, Dumbledore murmured, he means to come for the heart of our world. He closed his eyes. And he will not stop there. On the shelf behind him, the black feather stirred again. Its magic had grown stronger over the years, though no one could explain why. When Dumbledore had once asked Ollivander's opinion, the wand maker had shaken his head in wonder. It holds an enchantment older than death, Ollivander had said. Whoever it belonged to has left a mark upon the magic itself. Now the feather glowed faintly, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Dumbledore smiled sadly. Still you resist him, Evelyn. Even now. He turned back to the fire, where Fawkes watched him with solemn eyes. And perhaps, when my strength fails, another will take your place. He raised his wand and summoned a golden orb from the fire. Within it shimmered the faint outline of a child. A vision not yet fulfilled. A hope not yet born. One day, Dumbledore said, there will be another who stands where you fell. The orb flickered and was gone. In Little Hangleton, Voldemort stood before the window of his ancestral home. The fields below stretched dark and endless, the wind stirring the grass like waves upon a sea. The moonlight painted his face in pale silver. Behind him his followers knelt. Among them stood Abraxas Malfoy, Lucinda Yaxley, and the Lestranges, all sworn to him by blood and fear. Voldemort spoke softly, yet every word carried. The Ministry weakens. Dumbledore hides behind his castle. Soon the age of secrecy will end. Wizards will rule again as they were meant to. The crowd murmured, trembling with zeal. But first, he continued, we must cleanse our ranks. There are those among us who doubt, those who question my power. He gestured to the side. A man was dragged forward, a former Auror turned spy, his face bruised and bloodied. Confess your doubts, Voldemort said. The man met his gaze with quiet defiance. You are not immortal. You are afraid. The chamber fell silent. The faint hiss of serpents echoed along the walls. Voldemort raised his wand. Perhaps, he said softly, but fear is not weakness. Fear is the weapon of the wise. The flash of green filled the room. When the body hit the floor, Voldemort felt the magic recoil again, resisting. The air rippled with a faint shimmer of gold, like sunlight over grass. He turned sharply, his voice a snarl. Who dares? But there was no one. Only the echo of the name he had once buried. Evelyn. He destroyed the corpse in fury, reducing it to ash. Yet when he turned away, the scent of wild flowers still lingered, soft and mocking. He would find it, the remnant, the trace, the memory that refused him. He would hunt it down and crush it. But in that moment, deep beneath his rage, a single thought stirred, a thought he did not dare speak even to himself. Perhaps some part of her had clung to him. Perhaps her death had not been as final as he believed. That night, as storms swept across Britain, Dumbledore wrote one final line in his private journal before extinguishing the candles. Evelyn Meadowcroft was not forgotten. Her courage became a spell that even death could not erase. He closed the book, unaware that somewhere in the darkness beyond the walls of Hogwarts, the first spark of her lingering magic flickered to life again. A soft wind stirred the forest. The meadow beyond the castle swayed in silence, and the world turned, waiting for the moment when all things hidden would come to light. The dawn broke pale and cold over the valley of Little Hangleton. Mist curled low across the ground, shrouding the ruined manor and its restless grounds in a silence older than grief. Within those walls, the air trembled with enchantments, wards layered upon wards, built to keep intruders out and secrets in. No bird sang there, no living creature lingered. Yet beneath the manor, in the depths where torches burned, without flame, a voice whispered. It was not human, though it spoke with human words. It came from the stone itself, from the relics gathered upon the altar, Horcruxes thrumming faintly in their cursed sleep. The whisper was soft at first, but it grew as though the chamber itself breathed it into being. You are not whole. Lord Voldemort sat in meditation, his eyes closed, his wand resting across his knees. The voice reached him from everywhere and nowhere, threading through the air like smoke. You are not whole, it repeated. You left something undone. His eyes snapped open, scarlet gleaming in the dim light. Lies, he hissed. There is nothing undone. I have conquered death. The silence answered him. Then the whisper came again, soft, almost sorrowful. She remembers. Voldemort rose, cloak whispering against the floor. The serpents carved along the walls seemed to turn their heads as he moved. Show yourself, he commanded. Whatever you are, you cannot frighten me. But the voice had already gone, leaving only the sound of his own breathing. He stood there a long time, still as a statue. Finally, he raised his wand and flicked it toward the altar. The locket, the ring, the cup, they glowed faintly, resonating with his power. He could feel their pulse, the fragments of his soul resting in each one, unbreakable, eternal. And yet, beneath that certainty, he felt something else, a discordant note, a whisper in his magic that was not his own. He clenched his fist until his nails cut his palm. It ends tonight, he said. Whatever ghost lingers from that woman will be unmade. He began his preparations. At Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore was already awake. The castle was still, bathed in the pale light of dawn. He stood at the window of his office, watching the mist drift over the forbidden forest. He could not explain the unease that had stirred him from sleep. It was a feeling he had known before, on nights when fate itself seemed to turn its gaze upon the world. fox, perched nearby, shifted uneasily, feathers glinting like fire in the dimness.
"You feel it too, don't you?" Dumbledore said softly. The phoenix let out a low, mournful cry. Dumbledore turned toward his desk. Upon it lay Evelyn Meadowcroft's wand and the black feather. The feather glowed faintly now, brighter than it had in years. A warmth radiated from it, not heat, but life. "She's stirring," Dumbledore murmured. "Even death cannot silence her." He touched his wand to the feather, and the air shimmered with the image of a meadow. Sunlight, wind, the faint sound of laughter. It was not a memory of his own, but hers. And beneath that light, a shadow stirred. Voldemort's face, pale and cruel, eyes burning red. Dumbledore's jaw tightened. "So it ends as it began." He gathered his cloak and stepped toward the door. The portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black stirred irritably as he passed. "Another midnight errand?" the portrait drawled. "You'll wear yourself to a ghost, Albus?" "Perhaps," Dumbledore replied, "but better a ghost who fought than a man who stood still." He left, without another word. That night, beneath a moon veiled in cloud, Dumbledore apparated to the valley of Little Hangleton. The air was thick with the scent of death and rain. The manor loomed before him black against the horizon. He could feel the magic even from here, ancient, poisonous, alive. He drew his wand. Lumos. The light flared softly, falling upon the twisted iron gate. As he passed through, the wards shuddered, testing him. He whispered words of counter-magic, older than Hogwarts itself, his voice calm and steady. The wards resisted, then parted like water. He entered the house. Inside, time had stopped. Dust hung in the air like breath held too long. The portraits on the walls were slashed to ribbons. Their inhabitants fled. Every inch of the place stank of enchantment and blood. Dumbledore descended the stairs into the cellars. The further he went, the colder it became. He could feel Voldemort's presence now, not physical, but imprinted in every stone. At the bottom, he found it, the great chamber of serpents. The Horcruxes glowed faintly upon the altar. But he was not alone. Voldemort stood before them, waiting. "Dumbledore," he said softly, almost pleasantly, "you took your time." "Tom," Dumbledore replied, his voice calm, "it seems you've redecorated." The faintest flicker of irritation crossed Voldemort's face. "Do not call me by that name. Tom Riddle is dead." "No," Dumbledore said gently. "You killed the boy, yes, but not his soul. It still cries within you, doesn't it?" Voldemort's wand flashed upward, faster than sight. "You think to reason with me, old man? You think words can save you?" "Not me," Dumbledore said, raising his own wand. "But perhaps they can save what little remains of you." The air exploded between them. Green light and gold collided, filling the chamber with sound and fury. Stone cracked, serpents screamed, magic tore through the air like a storm. Voldemort moved like lightning, his curses cutting through the darkness. Dumbledore met them all, his wand a blur of flame and silver light. Sparks flew across the floor like stars. Then, as their spells collided once more, something changed. The Horcruxes upon the altar began to tremble. A thin golden light seeped between them, the same hue as the feather that now burned within Dumbledore's cloak. Voldemort staggered, his eyes widening. "What have you done?" Dumbledore's voice rose above the storm. "Not I, Tom. She." The golden light surged outward, filling the chamber. It poured through the cracks, through the carvings, through the air itself. And in that light, a figure formed, a woman's shape, faint and translucent,
her hair like sunlight, her gaze calm and steady. Evelyn Meadowcroft. Voldemort stepped back, trembling with fury. "No, you're dead." Her voice was soft, but it filled the chamber like a bell. "You cannot kill what remembers." He raised his wand to strike, but the light struck first. It poured into him, through him, burning without fire. He screamed, clutching his chest, as the fragments of his soul, the Horcruxes, shuddered and cracked. The ring split, the cup shattered, the locket burst open like a dying heart. When the light faded, Voldemort was gone. Only the whisper of his laughter remained, echoing faintly before vanishing into the void. Dumbledore knelt amid the ruin. The chamber was silent once more. Evelyn's figure lingered before him, her smile faint and peaceful. "You gave him his first death," Dumbledore said softly. "And his last," she replied. "For all things begun in darkness must end in light." Her image began to fade. "Tell them I was not forgotten." "You never were," he said. And then she was gone. Dumbledore stood alone, the dawn breaking faintly through the cracks in the ruined ceiling. The first rays of sunlight touched the floor, falling upon the remnants of the shattered Horcruxes. He turned toward the light. "Sleep now, Evelyn," he whispered. "Your truth endures." Outside, the wind swept over the valley, carrying with it the scent of wild flowers. The war was not yet over, its darkest chapter still unwritten, but the first ghost of victory had come. And though few would ever know her name, the world would stand because one forgotten woman had dared to seek the truth.